Super Mario Strikers, or Mario Smash Football for our European and Australian friends, is one of my favorite Mario sports games of all time. It's edgy, tense, and a whole lot of fun. Seriously, it is so much fun to play. I bust out the game all the time to play with friends, and it can get pretty intense. But where did this all come from? How did our friendly Mario turn into this? And how did the game become what it is today? Well, on this episode of Beta64, all those questions will be answered as we discuss the beta of Super Mario Strikers. First off, if you've seen Strikers, you know that the art style was a large departure from the norm. But this wasn't created overnight. With a few pieces of concept art, you can see this progression from this to this. This piece was the earliest and perhaps the most akin to the original, traditional style of Mario, but he does seem a bit peeved. Next up is a piece a bit further off the beaten path, which shows Mario with a hoodie on. And that's the last we see of that, because next, Mario's in a new outfit. And with all those M logos, you can't make any mistake. That's Mario. Peach also sports a different outfit from the final game. That's a great departure from the established look that was around for many years before. Next, Mario has two similar outfits with some different accessories, like a GameCube controller for a belt buckle, and for some weird reason, a flame helmet. Mario certainly looks a lot more menacing in this next similar piece of concept art, and you can start to see the sketch art style from the final game start to take shape. The last concept art piece shows Mario with some blue on his outfit, which isn't in the final game, but overall, he's pretty much one step away from the final version. Super Mario Strikers was first revealed to the public at E3 2005 as a new Mario sports title developed by Next Level Games, and included at the show was a playable demo of the game. In an interview, it was mentioned that Strikers was influenced by NHL Hitz Pro, which was also developed by Next Level Games. This hockey game helped develop the controls of Strikers as well as the players' collisions on the field and how goalkeepers function. At first, Super Mario Strikers was intended to be a realistic game, but of course, we can see that didn't happen. After talking with Nintendo, the developers decided to make the game have an over-the-top style of gameplay. In another interview, the team explained the reason why they didn't include a penalty system within the game. Instead of the inclusion of cards, they chose to give power-ups to the team that was most being pushed around. The trailer shown at E3 2005 is quite different from the final game, so let's take a look at it in detail. First thing you'll see in the trailer is a different logo for Super Mario Strikers, and once the gameplay starts, despite the obvious HUD change, you can notice that the textures are a lot more colorful than the final game. And speaking of color, Mario's outfit has some blue that's not on his final outfit. And where do we see a blue Mario outfit? Why, the concept art that we saw earlier, of course. Wario went through the same thing. His outfit has more purple on it than the final version, and not only that, his hat is quite different too. Also, Luigi makes a short appearance in the same trailer, and you can see that instead of his final soccer uniform, he's wearing his normal everyday outfit. And one other thing, at this part the text goal appears on the screen because obviously a goal was just made, but in the final, this text does not show when a player makes a goal. Now, in addition to all of these cosmetic changes, some gameplay was altered between this trailer and the final game. When nearing the goal, some text appears on the ground telling the player to shoot the ball. And at this point in the video, Toad, a sidekick, attempts to perform a super strike, which is exclusively for the team's captains in the final game. Now, if the sidekicks originally got the super strike, then what did the captains get? Something entirely different actually, and is completely removed from the final game. Take a look. If that reminds you of something, it should. It resembles the Mega Strikes in Mario Strikers Charged for the Wii. Between E3 2005 and the game's release at the end of the year, there were some videos that were uploaded featuring gameplay from a still early build of the game. Let's take a look at some of this footage and figure out what changed, shall we? First up, the opening animations. Both Mario and DK have different animations, so let's take a look at them side by side with the final version. After this, the display says kickoff, while the final has Mario literally kicking off the ball. The field that we see come up in the footage didn't make it into the final game and was probably just a simple field made for the demo, as it's, well, simple. At this point, we also get our first look at the players, and DK and his team are different in a few ways. One, DK has a tie on, which never crossed over into the game's release. And speaking of DK, his goal animation is, let's just say, it needs some work done, and thankfully the animators did fix it before the final release. The toads on his team are also a different color. Now in the game, the sidekick's color does change depending on the captain you choose, but having toads on Donkey Kong's team in the final game presents them with a different color than what's shown in the early footage. It should also be noted that sidekicks can still perform super strikes in this build, so it's clear that the idea was removed later on in development. The banana item is a bit interesting in this demo. Here in the footage, Mario gets bananas twice. And keep in mind that in Super Mario Strikers, you can only get bananas in bunches of 3. First off, the icon doesn't say how many there are, but when using it, 3 bananas appear like normal. But immediately after, Mario gets more bananas, and even though it's the same icon, 5 bananas appear this time. So I guess the amount of bananas that would appear on the field was randomized at first. One last thing I like to mention is that in some early screenshots, there's no audience to be found, which is a bit strange and likely was just because the field was unfinished. I also found a short interview on Super Mario Strikers, and even though it didn't really show anything different than what we saw before, it's mentioned that the trigger button was originally used to shoot the ball instead of the B button. Okay, let's move on to unused text strings. First, we can see some early names for the stadiums in the game. Take a look at this list of the fields with their final name, internal name, and their name in the file stadium.ini. Some interesting changes include Crater Field being called Yoshi Stadium, the Battle Dome being called Forbidden Dome, and Bowser Stadium was once called Super Stadium. There's actually an 8th stadium mentioned in the file called Peach's Palace, which has a comment next to it saying, eventually will not exist. It could have been removed because they didn't want to take the time to make an 8th stage, or perhaps it was replaced with the Palace, as the only 2 stages that aren't associated with characters are the Battle Dome and the Palace, and the latter definitely sounds like it could have been associated with Peach. Another few pieces of text are quite interesting. Some files make references to Mario Goalie and Luigi Goalie. It's interesting because in the final game, only critters guard the goal, with no options to change that. None of the other captains have a reference to being a goalie, so it may have been removed early on before the introductions of the other characters perhaps. There's also some text that references a removed power-up called Twister. It was replaced by the Chain Chomp and the sound effects associated with it are gone, but the visual effects are still there and include lightning flashes. There are a ton of files left in Strikers that were originally used by developers to perform many different debug functions. Within this treasure trove of files, there's actually some really cool little things I'd like to mention. In those files, there are actually 3 early ones associated with game difficulty. These include the difficulties Brain Dead, Human, and Superhuman. But the final game uses different files for its 4 difficulties: Rookie, Professional, Superstar, and Legend. Something a little more interesting is that Mario originally used a hammer according to some text in the sound effects list. You actually saw him use this in the early footage that we saw before when he performs the Super Strike. And speaking of sound effects, the crowd was originally going to have many different sounds associated with them, which would have been randomly chosen from a list and then played during the game. These sounds include clapping and stomping. In fact, why not take a listen to a few of them yourself? One last thing I'd like to mention is that there's an audio track left in the game that was originally used for testing purposes. It's the Super Mario World Overworld theme performed at the 1991 game music concert by the Tokyo City Philharmonic Orchestra. Take a listen. So that's the beta of Super Mario Strikers. Despite being a spin-off game, Strikers had a lot of interesting changes made throughout its development, and much more than I thought there would have been. In fact, I actually have no problem with the changes that were made. which doesn't happen too often. I mean, I guess it would have been cool to have an 8th stadium, but really that doesn't take away from this awesome game. So this has been Beta64 with the Super Mario Strikers beta. Thanks for watching.